where we came up with the idea for it. So obviously yesterday was Earth Day, and we in the Scripps Sustainability group have kind of extended that out to Earth Week and Earth Month, and the eventual goal of always thinking about the Earth. And as part of our Earth Week celebrations, we do an annual garage swap, and that'll be happening tomorrow, Wednesday, from 11:30 to 1:30 p.m. on Paca Green down by Vaughn Hall. And that's where you can bring in old clothing and books and other items that you don't want anymore, or that's kind of lying around, and people can come and take things that other people have brought in. So it's just a way to redistribute things and find second or third homes for things. And as part of that, this year we decided that we would also collect old surfboards and wetsuits. So if you have broken boards lying around your office, or old boards that you don't use anymore, that you don't feel like selling, you can bring those down to Paca tomorrow. And as I was looking into what we could do with these boards once we collect them, where we can send them, I realized there's a lot of energy and effort around Southern California going into this question of diverting old surfboards and wetsuits from landfill and finding second homes for them, second lives for them, kind of repurposing them. So, and then I looked into it more, and I realized that people are working on all aspects of surfboards production and kind of the whole process to try to make that more sustainable. So Kevin, Stephen, and Billy will all be talking about aspects of that. And then probably a lot of you here at Scripps are familiar with Phil's work with the Smartfin Project. Maybe you've used Smartfins before. But we also wanted to bring that in to show how we can kind of use surfers as the citizen science body to sample in a rather undersampled part of our ocean. And I hope all of them will also talk about, actually I'm going to ask you all a question, but talk about how your work has kind of reached people maybe just beyond the surfing community. And my hope with this panel is that whether or not you surf or you've never owned a surfboard in your life, this will help us all think a little bit more about the things we use and kind of what they're made from, and what their end of life fate is, and maybe how we can be creative about kind of reusing what's over here. So they're each gonna do a brief intro and then get some questions.
Hello. I'll just talk loud. So I'm Kevin, co-founder of Sustainable Surf. We're a nonprofit based in California, founded in 2011. We started Sustainable Surf as a way to help the surf industry and culture become more sustainable. When we launched the company, we couldn't figure out why surf companies weren't interested in sustainability. Like Patagonia and other ones are all charging forward, but Billabong, Quicksilver, Rip Curl were all stuck in the past. So we thought we could come in here and help make that happen. And the most obvious place to really start was the surfboard, because at some point, surfboards were all sustainable 1,000 years ago. Every single board was inherently as sustainable as it could possibly get. In a culture that was one of the most sustainable cultures in the history of humanity. So what happened with modern surfboards? We saw it's a real disconnect, because if you're a surfer who knows anything about the environment, you know your surfboard, if you've ever been to a glassing factory, is one of the least sustainable things you can be riding in the most sustainable places you want to be. So right there is a big disconnect to actually solving the problem. And we saw an opportunity. Right? So this is the status in 2011. There are probably 500 eco-boards made globally, mostly wood. Nobody believed that eco-boards could perform. They thought that they were, okay, sure, it's a good idea, but if you want to rip, you're not going to buy one of these. Right? And there have been some prior products like green foam, where they were greenwashing their performance, and the market had been burned on this, like, oh, the new sustainable foam, and actually didn't work, lost a lot of money. And then there's some new materials coming out, like the Marfa foam, recycled EPS, and the entropy bioresin, but because of those other problems, they had no market share. So we thought as a nonprofit, we don't make or sell any boards. I'll make that really clear. We come in and help solve that by launching a certification program. So in 2012, we launched the EcoBoard Project. That's our label. It's actually a second-gen label. We had an older one in the beginning. We worked with the first two manufacturers who are making the biomaterial, or the sustainable materials that we verified as an independent science-based organization. Then we had a really key focus on all the stakeholders. So what we're trying to do is to understand all the stakeholders in the marketplace. And here's the stakeholders in the surfing marketplace. And what is the story they need to know to be part of this new vision of a sustainable surfing future. Because we all know that if we don't do something, the oceans are like on the front lines. Right? So we worked with consumers, with the surf shops, with media, we had scientists on board, others. These are our other programs right here. And then of course we had pro surfers that we worked with, manufacturers like Channel Islands, Firewire, material manufacturers who make the foam and the resin, they were actually really key. And then the apparel brands to help provide funding and tell the stories. And for the first 3 years, the goal was to basically solve the performance issue. Sustainable boards actually ripped. Like you have no drawbacks doing this, so why not do it? And this was the big thing. In 2014, Kelly paddled out on the EcoBoard at Bells Beach, right? So like, if Kelly rides it in the heat and he won the heat, that pretty much proves that it works. So that was a big step. And then, not too long after that, Pipe Masters, Trestles, and USF were all one riding EcoBoards with our label on it. So 2015, there are 25,000 verified EcoBoards. And this is our trademark, actually, is verified EcoBoard in all caps. That means it has our mark and label on it as a nonprofit that verifies it. And they're mini sustainable materials. So one of the key things was to provide choice in making boards. Making surfboards is a really complicated handmade process that actually requires a lot of attention to detail. People don't realize how hard it is to make materials for surfboards that actually can be hand shaped by artists and don't degrade in water, in the sun, and whatnot, right? So there were probably about a dozen new materials coming online at that point, following the pathway we had laid out for them. And then, because the market is now moving towards this, there's a new vision needed because they're still not very close to an ancient Hawaiian surfboard at this point. It's a board that's made of plant-based resin, about 15 to 20% plant-based material, so still 80% petroleum. And then the foam is probably 25% recycled EPS, so still 79% petroleum. So really, it's on the right path, it's telling the right story, but it's not there yet. So we had to figure that out. And one last slide here is the impact. So basically, this is how many boards were made by year. And once we started this campaign, all the stories and the science behind it, the market started to respond. Okay, so here's the second challenge, is how do we drive real innovation on sustainability? So the first thing we need is better data, right? So we did an LCA, it's a life cycle study. We had Channel Islands and Firewire basically build a couple of identical boards, one eco-board, one non-eco board, and measure every element, every aspect of waste, sandpaper, fiberglass tape, energy, everything, weigh it all. And then we had a consultant, Pure Strategies, produce the life cycle study. And what it showed is that a standard poly board that weighs 6 pounds emits 105 pounds of CO2 in a life cycle basis. And that the majority of that is resin, some of the blank, and some is energy. An eco board that meets our standard cuts that by 30%. And still the biggest impacts are the resin, the blank, and the energy. In the transportation, people think, oh, board built in Asia, how can that be sustainable? Because it's being shipped all halfway around the world. They're being shipped by sea in containers, and the net energy that goes into that is actually very low. And the fiberglass also is very, very low, it's only 2%. Okay, this was the big surprise, which is the weight. So a poly board, like the poly board weighed 5 3/4 pounds, it emitted an additional 10 pounds of waste while in production. That shocked us. We knew it was big because surfboards, you're shaping the foam off a blank and there's resin drips that fall down. We knew it was there, but we didn't realize it was that big. And even an eco board, where the epoxy resin is more valuable, they spend more time making it. That still emits more than the weight of the board in waste. So how do we solve that? We created Gold Level, which was a vision and a roadmap to zero waste. So now instead of having just one label, we had 2 labels. Level 1 is the easy entry path for any surfboard builder to just choose a material on our website. So there's now 17 different materials available, and start making eco-boards just by using one of those. Gold Level was a very detailed approach. You have to use multiple materials, do a waste audit every year, and start working on ways to reduce the waste. And what we found is there's a pathway to an 80% carbon footprint life cycle reduction through Gold Level if someone gets there. No one's gotten there yet, but actually that's the competition happening right now, is to get there without any drawback in performance or manufacturing. So that's the goal. Here's an example. This is Earth Technologies. That's the board right there. It's my board. Brian Harris is in Torrance in Los Angeles. He's the most committed, probably the most sustainable surfboard factory in the USA right now. And here's how he's going zero waste. So basically, when you glass a surfboard, the resin drips down, right? So he's got these drip trays that collect all the resin waste. And he's basically squeegeeing all that resin drips into a cup. which then goes into a mold to make a hand plane. All that plastic underneath, all the drips on the floor, as those harden over time, over a few months, he takes those, grinds them, shreds them, and that becomes the inclusions you see in the hand plane. Right? So all the waste from this factory is being repurposed or upcycled into some other product. And then he's using the worms to actually take all the foam dust that's left and to basically recycle that. Now, Stephen and I were having a chemistry conversation. I didn't finish it, but this was invented by a guy named Eddie Garcia, who's from Hawaii. He's basically the embodiment of the ancient Hawaiian permaculture experts who understood how nature worked. So he has a 4-stage process where the worms first basically chew the foam into tiny little microscopic pellets, and then he adds bacteria and fungi and other creatures that I think are breaking those covalent bonds, and Stephen, we should test that. So this is where we are in 2019. There are 65,000 eco-boards made by 200 plus builders in 25 different countries. That number is growing every week. We have more people joining the program to start getting on board and telling the story. There's 17 new materials, that have been verified. There's new ones coming on board, such as what Stephen's going to talk about in a minute. And then companies, and this is actually just about to be announced in the next 2 months. You're going to hear several major surf organizations and companies announcing going carbon neutral and zero waste. And this is what they're competing on. This is the playing field now. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't built this whole backstory and science base on what is a sustainable surfboard, how is it defined, what are the factors that matter, like resin and foam and waste, and what are the factors that don't, like transportation and fiberglass. And then the final bit, I'll tell you a bit more about sustainable surfing and other things that we do, is that surfers have many on-ramps to this story, to be part of the story, not just to hear about it, but to be part of it. So our Waste to Waste program has products that are made from recycled waste, and we pull things like the Deep Blue Bag. By the way, quick aside, if you want to win your own Deep Blue Bag, if you haven't taken Cynthia's survey, make sure you do that. She's closing it. So I'm working with Cynthia Sia to do a survey on decision science for her master's studies, and you can go on our Instagram or the WSL's Instagram since they just posted it, or ask Cynthia how to get on, and we're giving away one of those bags. We're giving it away. There's a Deep Blue event, which is a sustainable event. So the Vulcan Pipe Pro just published their sustainability report from the last contest. It's on our website as well. Our Sea Freeze program is to have surfers funding regenerative projects like mangrove planting and kelp reforestation and coral regeneration around the world. And the final question is, like, what if every surfer on the planet is climate positive? Would that inspire everyone, even non-surfers, to actually live a sustainable lifestyle? So that's our goal to get there. And through surfboards and everything else, it's like those are the on-ramps to make that happen so we can all actually live ideal. Right?
Awesome, thank you.
I am professor of molecular biology at UC San Diego. You know, we're part of Red. So my background is in algae biotechnology, and about 11 years ago, I started a company called Sapphire Energy that was going to take algae and turn it into fuel. And they raised a boatload of money and got algae to make lots of interesting hydrocarbons, and then the price of gasoline, price of oil started dropping, and they eventually faded away. But during that time, we developed a lot of very interesting technology, one of which was to take the oils from algae and see if we could turn them into other petroleum replacements, things that had higher value than gasoline, but were still derived from petroleum. So I came back to my lab in about 2015 and said, okay, you guys, we've got algae, we've got all this wonderful hydrocarbons we can make in there. What are we going to make instead of gasoline? And the students immediately came back and said, oh, we can make something called polyol, and from a polyol we can make polyurethanes, therefore we're going to make surfboards. So we thought that was a good idea. So we took oil from algae and we turned that into polyols, and we mixed that with petroleum-based isocyanates, so about 50-50, and we could make very nice rigid foams. And in fact, we made a surfboard back in 2015, and that became quite famous. We transferred that technology over to a company called Arctic Foam. They now make commercial surfboard blanks. They're about 27% algae oil, so the renewable content is about 27%. It's the only board John Florence rides. It's the only board Jordy Smith rides. So they're sort of up to snuff in terms of performance, but they sort of stuck at about 25% renewable. We were having a difficult time getting above that, primarily because the physical demands of a surfboard are unbelievable, right? Like they have to be, as Kevin showed, they have to be 5 pounds, and yet that 5 pound, 5.7 pound board can take more than 2 tons of pressure on it without breaking. So they're a pretty demanding product, but at the same time we were making those, because that surfboard got so much play, we started to get phone calls from shoe companies, including a shoe company in Germany that makes millions and millions, in fact hundreds of millions of shoes. And they said, if you guys can make rigid polyurethane surfboards, you can probably make soft polyurethanes. And we said, yeah, we can make soft polyurethanes. We already know that. We're already making some. And they said, well, why don't we collaborate with you and we'll see if we can make midsoles for a shoe. So we started that 2 years ago. And in December of last year, we finally hit specification for their midsole. But midsole on a running shoe is pretty high specification, so it took us a while to get there. But while we were doing that, we started in my lab in collaboration with Mike Burkhart and Skip Pomeroy to think about, well, okay, what other urethanes could we make? And one of the things we immediately came up with was flip-flops, right? So we started to manufacture these things. So these are algae-based polyurethanes. These specific ones right here are 48% renewable content. But the really kind of cool thing about them is that they're 100% biodegradable. Now, there's only one plastic that can biodegrade. I'll explain this to Kevin later. That's because the laws of chemistry and physics tell you what bonds can be taken apart with enzymes. And there are actually 2 bonds in any plastics that can be taken apart. One is a polyester. There are enzymes that degrade those, and the other is polyurethane. And so if you make things that have only polyester and only polyurethane bonds, they can degrade. If you make polystyrene, you can break it down into little pieces, but you cannot degrade that back into CO2, right? There's only 2 that do it. This is known. This is science, and we can measure it. So while we were making our polyurethanes, we were very careful to make sure that they had polyester and polyurethane bonds only. So you can now take these things. We also went and got a professional designer. I designed the first ones, which were pretty clunky things. But we got Tricia Haig, who was the chief designer for Sanook, to come and design these for us last summer. We had the molds made and have been manufacturing these things for the last 2 months. So the lifetime of the shoe is about 2 years. They degrade at about 3% a month. So on your feet, if you let them get wet and stay wet, you will lose these things in about a year. They will be unwearable. But if you keep them dry, like you do with leather shoes or cotton shoes, if you dry them out when you're done, these things will stay years. I've had my pair that I've been wearing every day for about, I can't wear them in labs, I'm on today, but I wear them every day. I've had them for 3 months and they're still holding up very well. But if I were to take these things and throw them in a compost pile, which we've done, so room temperature compost pile, or whatever the temperature is outside, they will degrade in about 12 months to nothing. So we're getting ready to launch these things. We have some very big industrial partners who are quite interested in this. We're just negotiating with them. The toughest part is going to be scale up, obviously. There are not a lot of companies that grow algae at big scale. There's only 2 on the planet, so we buy our oil from them right now. We will tap them out very soon because some of our partners make a few 100 million pairs of shoes per year. But we hope to have these things on the market. We have test ones now. If you guys really want to beta test these things and you happen to be men's size 9 or women's size 8, which is the only 2 sizes we have, you can send me an email and I will set you up as a beta tester on these things. But that means you have to wear them every day for many hours per day, and you have to fill out all kinds of forms for it. But if you really want to try a pair, you can. And if you don't, if you just wait till next Christmas, we will probably have these things on the market. In fact, we'll probably be selling them in the Birch Aquarium and at the UC San Diego bookstore sometime in the late fall, so they will be ready for Christmas. Right? And so the reason, I started to say, we did not and have not concentrated so much on surfboards. The reason we didn't do that is because if you travel all over the world, you never see dead surfboards washed up on the beach or floating in the ocean. If you travel all around the world, you will see these things everywhere. They are about 25% of the pollution in the Indian Ocean. And the reason for that is because even though here in California only surfers wear flip-flops, this is the shoe that the rest of the world wears. 3 billion of these things are made every year. It's the shoe of India, it's the shoe in China, it's the shoe in Southeast Asia. right? The fishermen wear these and the farmers wear these. They sometimes look a little different, sometimes they'll have a strap at the top like this, but they're essentially the same thing. And so these things will, they come from CO2 fixed by algae, and they go back to CO2 at the end of their life. And we believe that this is sort of the future of shoes. All shoes we build. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
And you guys can have a question.
Thank you. I'll just sit here too. I'm the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer for a 501c3 Rerip. It's Rerip Inc. But I also own a business called Coconut Pete Surfboard Repair and Trading Company. And about 11 years ago, Rerip approached me to be a drop-off point for their sustainability movement in the surfboard industry, which covers two main items, would be the wetsuits and surfboards that are already produced and already manufactured through the various ways that are being, surfboards are being made at this point. So there's a great push, as you can tell by Kevin's presentation there, that we're getting there. The surfboard industry was not an industry 40 years ago. It was maybe a cottage industry, but and I was growing up at that time. But now we're looking at a billion-dollar industry with many manufacturing areas all over the world. The distance that things travel nowadays to get to the United States due to labor or whatever various reasons to be shipping all of our production elsewhere. I deal with the boards that have been produced that are getting dropped off in the state of California through some of our major sponsors, which are Kevin's sponsors as well, Patagonia and Firewire. And so Patagonia has recycling bins all the way up the coast to San Francisco at all their locations. Firewire teams up with us during their delivery route. So if we have boards in San Francisco, obviously I can't pick them up here. I have to run the organization here. Firewire teams up with us, picks up from Patagonia, delivers back to their Carlsbad location, and we get these boards en masse and other products due to the movement and transportation of all these products across the globe. So when I get these boards, what we do is we repurpose them. Very few of these boards make it to the landfill. We're either giving them to artists or we're rebuilding them and remanufacturing them and reselling them to the public or through the nonprofit, giving them away to several target audiences that recipients that we choose, mainly military, PTSD, and it's people exiting the military as well as current military. So we give away boards that way, and then we also give them to, off our website, we have a board submission thing, so anybody can apply for a free surfboard, and they'll receive a remanufactured surfboard through us or through Coconut Pete's. And so that's basically what we've been doing. We've been doing it for about 11 years. We've just opened up our first location, and it's in Ocean Beach. We do plan on attacking other industries with Rerip. We do have a forward movement to create a trade school that we can teach at-risk youth skills that we can place them in any of our locations, either for surfboard repair or retail experience or other industries we plan on attacking. We just started adding car donations to our project to try and generate more awareness, because this is just one industry we're attacking. Obviously the shoes, another part of industry that this is where we need to go, because really the microplastics is what is going to damage us all in the future, regardless of where they go. But right now in the city of San Diego, the Miramar landfill has a moratorium right now, 2020, that's next year. We will start shipping our trash elsewhere to other counties or out of state within the next 24 to 48 months. So the Miramar landfill is full. We've done our part to try and keep everything we get out of there, including other things that are donated to us. So that's pretty pretty much what we do. You know, we concentrate locally, but we're looking at the state of California as, first of all, being the #1, surf is the #1 sport in California, and here we are, and we're happy to represent it.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to participate, Laura, and thanks to Allison and Laura for all you're doing for sustainability at Scripps. I've been here for about 10 years now, and it's really incredible to see the amount of momentum that the two of you, and I'm sure others, have been building over just the past year or 2 years since I've been back. I graduated from the PhD program here in 2015, left for a year and a half, and then came back in 2017 to work on the Smartfin Project. So I'm a research and development engineer here now, focused on the development of the technology that's in these fins. Smartfin is a 501c3 nonprofit that is focused on two different things. On the one hand, we're building these surfboard fins that have sensors in them for environmental data collection, so that when surfers go out, they can take out the fin that's currently in their boards, that's just plastic or fiberglass or carbon fiber or what have you, put in a Smartfin and begin collecting data to help contribute to oceanography just by being in the water. And then on the other hand, it's a communication initiative. We're trying to engage the surf community to help become better stewards of the coastal marine environment, and working with the enthusiasm around this sport that everyone else here has talked about already, to try to inspire the next generation of stewards and protectors of the marine environment. So right now we're collecting temperature data on the Smartfin. Here you can see a map of all of the binned data that's been collected over the last 3 years. And so we have this old version of the technology that has the temperature sensor, GPS, and a motion sensor, and then it transmits data to a mobile app via Bluetooth. We have a new version of the technology which has a wet-dry sensor, so it turns itself on when it goes in the water, it turns itself off when it comes out, and then it has a cellular modem in it so that it automatically begins transmitting all of the data to the cloud as soon as your feet hit the sand. And so all of the data will be back in the cloud by the time I'm back in my office after a surf session, which is really nice for improving the real-time availability of data. My job is working on new sensors for Smartfin, so trying to invent pH sensors, other water quality things like chlorophyll, fluorescence, turbidity for water clarity, dissolved oxygen. People often ask about things like bacteria. The sensors are probably too big for surfboard fins at the moment, but eventually we want to have all sorts of things on there that help oceanographers, that help the surfers. I'll just really quickly drive around our little map here. We just recently made this available at smartfin.axds.co, and so all of the data that we've ever collected are freely available, and as you zoom in, these polygons that you see, which are actually averages or bins data from time and space in that region, as you start to zoom in more and more, and especially somewhere here like San Diego and Scripps, where we've distributed a lot of the fins and have people surfing quite often, you can start to see these individual dots appear that represent closer to individual data points collected by the Smartfin. Color represents the temperature in degrees Celsius. And so zooming back out, you can see the global distribution that we have so far. About 300 fins out there over the past couple of years, and our goal is to start distributing in numbers closer to the thousands. And it is a nonprofit, so we're not trying to make this thing to be the next Fitbit big startup company. We're trying to keep it nonprofit, keep it focused on the research and communication angles, so trying to figure out how to make that a financially sustainable initiative as well. Right now all of my research is sponsored by the Lost Bird Project, a nonprofit based in New York, and they have this initiative and a couple others, and they're responsible for all of the distribution and marketing and so on. And one of the things that we're really interested in right now is related to a capstone project that Vanessa here is working on, and she also has a survey that if you go to Smartfin's Instagram, if you can take a look at that, that would be really helpful for us to help figure out where to go next with the technology. So that's kind of my spiel, and I think we went through some questions. So.
Yeah, well, thank you, Phil. An extremely awesome and informative round of introductions, and my knowledge of surfboard production just quadrupled. So I'm going to start us off with a quick question for you guys, and then I want to open it to the audience to hear what you guys want to know. And I forgot to make an announcement. Please eat more food if you want, and then compost your plates and things at the end. There's a compost bin in the middle, so as you leave. But I am curious, you guys have talked some about kind of the progression and scaling up of your various organizations and the audiences you're really trying to target, but I'm curious if anyone has had stories of sort of inadvertently or also intentionally reaching people beyond just, you know, the pros who maybe are using eco boards, or the people who are already bringing their boards and looking for donations, or, you know, people who already know about Smartfin. If you kind of, in the course of developing your products and your organizations, if you sort of found that you're making more people aware of your sustainability efforts. So I don't know if anyone can jump in with a story or whatever. Maybe keep it to just a quick minute so we can have more questions. But
I can start.
sure.
You know, with what we do, we get boards from all different sources. I mean, we buy them, we get them donated. But it's funny to mention that, you know, people that don't even surf are. I look at surfing as a part of American culture. In Americana, it's like a skateboard or a vintage movie, you know, made in America. You know, these and granted, not all of them are made in the United States anymore, but the surfboard in the Midwest is probably one of the strangest things you'd ever see. But they're there, and you know, I just shipped a board to Lafayette, Louisiana. That's in the middle of gator country. There's not much surfing you're going to do there that you want to do. But somebody wanted that board they were going to put it on their little Cajun thing and pull it behind so they could attract gators. Okay, now that's the weirdest story I've ever heard. But it certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be on that board. But it apparently attracts the gators. So there you go. And it just goes on from there. We ship a lot of boards to the Midwest for no apparent reason at all. And I mean, they're going. One person bought 200 boards for the lake that they wanted to put signage around the lake. So, you know, they're not going to last out there forever. You know, in the Midwest, you know, you're going to get some snow, and you know they're going to go away pretty quick that way, but not real quick. They're just going to be unsignable. It won't look too good in a few years, but there you go. I mean, it's a weird story that it happens. And the next one is artists. And I brought that up earlier. Those are one of our main buyers. I mean, one guy, Jimmy Romo's Coastal Creations, he's bought well over 1,000 boards from us. And he continues to do it. And that's, he does his thing and sells them, and they go up and they get displayed. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, do you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say, not so much, I think this actually talks about the power of the consumer and how much influence this audience actually has. So, because we made flip-flops and because we made surfboards, those get out in the press, but I think the most interesting group that has visited us came from Smuckers. So these are the people who make jam and jelly, right? And they came out and they said, well, we want to talk to you because we know you make renewable plastics or biodegradable plastics, and would there be a chance that you could make biodegradable packaging for us? And I said, well, that's a tough one because packaging is actually a very complex mix. You have a water barrier and a gas barrier and strength, and you have to be able to print on it. We've been trying on a couple of different, we tried on potato chip bags, and some of these things are just tough. And I said, it's tough, but we're happy to do it for you. I said, but, you guys are Smuckers. Why are you driven by this? And he said, our consumers have told us that if we don't do more, they will go elsewhere. And I'm like, you make jam and jelly, that is gotta be the most sustainable thing on the planet. And yet, their consumer, their primary customer who buys from them is a woman with kids between the ages of 4 and 12. And it's that audience that is driving the retail market in this country now. And he said, oh, I can guarantee you, if I came back and told my boss that I could take algae and make a renewable plastic and put it in my thing, that is the only job I would be working on this year. And that's just consumer demand. So when consumers demand it, eventually they will get there. And if you guys don't demand it, then everybody will happily go about doing just what they're doing today and doing a lot of greenwashing on top of it. You know, advertising that they're sustainable because, you know, like Nike. Nike has a sustainable shoe that literally what's sustainable about it is that the cardboard that they ship it to you in is recycled. Nothing else is, but that's their eco shoe that they got out there right now. Right? And it's not the only thing, they do some good things as well. But you know, that would just kind of crack me up because I'm like, okay, Smartfin, I'll see what we can do.
That's awesome. That's what we want to hear is how you're reaching beyond. You guys are all reaching beyond just our little surf microcosms here. Anyone else have any?
Yeah, I would just add that it's really all about telling a new story of how we live on this planet, a way to regenerate and protect it instead of letting it just get destroyed as we're doing now. And how do we tell stories that do that? Who are the face of that story? So this is where surfing actually has a lot of power. Surfing is this #1 sport in America that kids want to learn. So we did some research with a partner about 5 years ago, and they went to festivals, like music festivals all around the country, and asked kids, what sports do you want to learn? Usually they're asking like what products you want to buy, but this one time they asked them what they wanted to learn, and surfing was by far #1. 20%, so 1 in 5 kids, I want to learn to surf. Right? And that was stronger the further away from the ocean the kids were. It's an aspirational lifestyle sport. So anyone who doesn't surf thinks a surfer is an environmentalist who believes in protecting the ocean. Anyone who surfs knows that surfers aren't different than anybody else. It's actually really hard on a daily basis to make a choice that has an ocean benefit to it. And we're kind of struggling with how to do that. I see the surf community as the community who has the most potential, latent potential, to really truly engage in what's called an ocean calculi. But we have to figure out how to unlock the barriers there. That's what we do. We try to figure out ways to unlock barriers. So that's essentially our mission as a nonprofit, is to find ways to do that. And our new one is climate change.
I'll just say one really short thing on top of that. I was going to say a really similar thing because I remember distinctly when I met Kevin probably 6 years ago, and he told me that was a really impactful thing, that this is the #1 sport that kids want to learn. And we use that in our mission because we know that there's a lot of climate science that we're not communicating as well as we could be. We're just not connecting with people across the country and across the world the way that we could be. And we found that surfing is a really fun way to get the message out. We're not trying to shove it down people's throats, but it's a way to connect with people on something that they find inspirational or exciting, and kind of opens the door to talk about the science that we're doing here at Scripps and beyond. So we're kind of playing off of the same exact idea there with what we're doing with Smartfin.
Awesome. Thank you all. Does anyone have questions for anyone or everyone? Yeah.
So I'm just curious, I'm not seeing that there's 65,000 boards being made every year right now. How many boards are being made in a year's time right now?
Oh yeah, I should put that in the slide. That's about 400,000 boards a year, and 500. The number's a little murky. That includes paddle boards as well, and windsurfers. So yeah, it's like around 10%, that's a solid chunk. And it could get a lot bigger too, especially when the algae foam from Arctic that Stephen's been developing is ready to launch, because that'll hit a lot more board movers.
Maybe you could talk about wetsuits and if there are sustainable alternatives to neoprene and that they work.
Yeah, there's a little bit happening with wetsuits. So Patagonia has been developing a plant-based neoprene, UX, which definitely has a lower carbon footprint. Had some problems with performance in terms of it was pretty heavy. I think they're fixing those now. I haven't got one in the last couple of years. And then there's neoprene can be recycled. There's a company called Sugamatsu right here in Encinitas. And they take old wetsuits and make them into new yoga mats. 100% recycled content wetsuit into new yoga mats that are pretty rad, especially if you like hot yoga where you sweat a lot with no slippage. And it's cool to see like that innovation of by taking waste. Like what happened back in the 1930s, Great Depression, World War II? Nothing was ever wasted. Any material was recycled and repurposed in any way possible. He couldn't afford to throw stuff away. And somehow all that shifted, and our mindset has changed. We want to get back into that, and hopefully we can use stories like surfing to help inspire that in every way.
Surfing, because if you're going to buy a new board, buy an eco board, but the most sustainable surfboard is the one that you already have. So it's a great question. How do you repair the stuff that you already have and that you already love? I think that's often left out of this conversation. So, great question.
You know, and Kevin brought up a good thing about the weight of a board in order to be able to, you know, boost airs and do things that, you know, well, let's say a pro would do, but maybe not the majority of people would do. Well, the glass schedules have decreased as in the past, where maybe in the 80s the strength of the fiberglass, the weave was a different ounce structure. Today they use double 4 ounce on the deck and a single 4 ounce bottom to create a surfboard most of the times, and that's for a short board. Unfortunately, the life of that board is limited by that because of that 2 tons of force you can put on a board at any given time. The board flexes, that gives you these properties, these performance characteristics, if you will, but they overflex and they snap, and then the board's history. The board's about, short board's like $650 for a poly board now, a little bit more for an epoxy board, and upwards of $1,500 for a regular short board. If you snap that, it's a shame, but you know, I tell people, somebody came up with it, surfboards are sponges wrapped in eggshells. So if you puncture an epoxy board, what happens? Capillary action pulls water into the board and destroys its performance characteristics. You know, we're trying to work on trying to find out a way to desiccate those and remove the moisture in the board so we can put it back to the same characteristics it once had without discarding it. So it's another thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, our LCA was cradle to what's called cradle to gate, meaning it's from raw materials manufacturing to the point of retail. Because we don't know how to measure the cradle to cradle, because once a board is sold and somebody uses it, every board's built different, everybody surfs differently. Someone might have a dozen boards, someone might have one board. How long is that board going to last? And so what's the carbon footprint of that one board's life cycle? A hard project it's real hard to measure that. And we're not going to put our number or label on something you can't really measure. So as Phil said, if you're buying a new board, make sure it's an eco board. And then eco boards, because epoxy resin is about twice as strong as poly resin when it's laminated, will be stronger and more durable. There is the issue of water, you got to be careful about dings, but yeah, those are all details in the weeds, I suppose. Yeah.
Sarah?
Besides algae, do you know of any other alternative materials that the surfboards can be made out of? I've seen a video of like a mushroom surfboard, or just I can't imagine with like 3D printing what kind of options might be possible in the future that are.
Well, okay, so let me answer that. No, let's see if we can chime in. So we're always hearing about the latest innovation of materials. That's what we set ourselves up to be, is sort of the cheerleaders and the gatekeepers of what an innovative, sustainable material is that also has to perform and work in the market, right? So the mushroom guys, we approached them like 5 years ago, and one of the founders is a surfer. This is Ecovative, that's the company, and they actually came to one of our boardroom shows. They tried to make a mushroom surfboard. It didn't work because it was too heavy and too hard to grow. I mean, you're growing mushrooms, not very hard to control. But they are making mushroom hand planes with Enjoy hand planes. That work, because a hand plane is a denser product. About 3 years ago, I started working with a company that was doing 3D printing, a grad student in the UK. He was trying to 3D print surfboards from algae material. And he got somewhere, but there's not enough money in surfboards for him to continue investing the time and effort in making that happen. So he basically went and got a real job once he got his degree. And that's a potential solution. I hope that comes about someday, but right now we're pretty much in the foam, which is either EPS foam, which can be recycled content. EPS can be recycled. And then there's the plant-based alternatives for polyurethane, like what Stephen's working on.
And you can make them from any plant oil. So we happen to make them from algae because that's one of the cheap ones to grow. And we avoided using food oils like soy or sunflower or others. But you can make them with those as well.
Oh, did you have a related follow-up? Or?
I tell people it's like the electric car, right? The first electric car was actually, believe it or not, built in 1889, okay, before gas-powered cars. And then they disappeared, and then one called the EV came back from GM in the mid-90s. And it just wasn't the right car at the right time, right? People weren't ready for it. Then Elon Musk came up with the Tesla. You know, he really started 8 years ago, but the first one came out 6 years ago. And you guys probably don't know this, but he went to GM about 5 years ago after the Model T had come out, and he was looking for funding for the Model S, and they told him to piss off. They told him there was no how, no way, electric cars, we made one before, they were gonna fail. But he held on, and now, today, there is a car show in New York, and there are 49 new electric cars on the market today that you can go and buy this year, including an electric pickup truck, right? So what does that mean? That means that quite often technologies will sit around for a long time, even be mature enough that they could be deployed, and the consumers will decide not to buy them, right? But now with the electric car, if anyone who's got one, and I do, once you've had an electric car, you are never going to own anything else because you realize how fantastic these things are. So we believe that these will be the same thing, and many of these opportunities will be the same. You know, you have the technology has to be ready in terms of technology readiness, and then consumers have to be ready to purchase it. But I think now with plastics, because of all of the, because of social media and because people can go around the world and you can actually videotape now the piles of plastic floating out in the ocean and the marine mammals that are eating it and dying. We don't see the fish, but they're doing the same thing. So I think this can go very quickly now once people make a decision to do it.
Yeah. If we switch from plastics to, let's say, algae, how much algae would it take? I mean, can we sustainably farm or grow that much algae? How close are we to solving that?
Yeah, that's funny. That's a discussion I just had this morning with a shoe company that makes 300 million shoes. They're like, how fast can you get there? It only takes about, here's the numbers. It takes about 300 grams to make a pair of these. So that's 1/3 of a kilogram. Right now, I can buy about 40 tons. So that's 40,000 kilograms. So I can only make about 120,000 shoes today. All right? But if I could make those today and I could sell them, then what I'm kind of banking on is that, next year I'll be able to get 400 tons. So it's like anything, there's going to have to be a scale up for this, but it's absolutely doable. I mean, the reason we chose algae and went that path is because in a sustainable sense, it's as good as you can get, meaning you can grow them in salt water, you don't need arable land, they're eating CO2 out of the atmosphere to make the product. So all of that stuff pencils out really well, but you still have to have people to grow it and harvest it and process it and do everything else. So you have to sort of build up that industry. But look, we had to do the same thing for electric cars and lithium batteries. And we had to do the same thing for cell phones, right? All of these things take time, but if they're better, then we'll build it and it'll go.
We'll probably do switch for maybe 2 more questions. Yeah, how about you?
I want to know about the total impact of new material, like production of the new material. Sometimes I was in Whilden project, we try to use biodegradable epoxy, but to get the epoxy, it costs more, or the impact is larger than just using normal material because it's a mass production, but also like need more steps. So what's the current situation of those new materials? How much less impact or more impact? I mean, it must be more impact compared to using like commercialized kind of conventional materials, but what's the situation of these new materials?
Well, that's where LCA is really key. Companies have to do life cycle studies to really understand that impact. And there is a new epoxy on the market that I didn't mention yet. It's called a Kenora resin, and it's a recyclable epoxy.
Yeah.
They can put it in essentially acid to break the bonds that the epoxy forms on the cross-links. So like vinegar is enough to dissolve the epoxy bonds. They recycle surfboards where they basically put the board in vinegar, like chop it up a bit, put it in vinegar, and then the fiberglass and the foam comes out independent of the epoxy. And that plastic can then be recaptured and made into thermoplastic. That's sort of like thinking about designing for zero waste. innovations that can happen.
But I also want to point out that anything that the first time you make it, it always takes you longer than you want, costs you more than you want.
Yeah, so,
And right, that's just the way life works.
yeah,
right?
so what's the prospect of like, okay, so when will the new material will overtake or?
So I think that depends on the use. I mean, the reason we went after these things and not another form of plastic is because this shoe weighs 300 grams, but sells for about $60. So in that case, even though we're about 1.5 times or almost 2 times as expensive as petroleum-based polyurethanes, since we're only using 1/3 of a kilogram, okay, you can buy a petroleum one for $3 and we're about $4.50. But we're only using $1.50's worth of material in this shoe and it's selling for $60 as opposed to using $1's worth. That's kind of immaterial to most of the shoe companies, right? Like they spend way more than that 50 cents on advertising. So it depends. So we can get them into something like this relatively quick, but you won't see this in any big volume plastic for a long time because people are more sensitive about the price. Like if you have to buy a ton of polyurethane to insulate your building, it does make a difference to you whether it's $3,000 or $4,500, depending upon your building. A building here at Scripps doesn't make one lick of difference because the land underneath it, is $6 or $7 million. So it's kind of product dependent, and you sort of have to pick and choose. But at some point, you get an economy of scale, and then those prices will start to go down, and then you can expand the market.